Today in studio we have Warrick Percy from Capasso. He's got a hell of a lot of knowledge about the digital realm of music, and it's backed by a lot of experience in sound and musicianship. All these things combined make him the Patrick Stewart of digital music. Let's see what Dr. X has to say today.
So Capasso stands for Composers, Authors and Publishers Association. It's a mechanical rights society. So people who don't know what mechanical rights are, it's basically, according to our Copyright Act, the right that comes about through a reproduction or reformatting of a composer's work. So Capasso essentially licenses, collects and distributes for mechanical rights. And mechanical rights come about through digital downloads, streaming, broadcast, phonomechanicals, which is physical CD. So yeah, that's essentially what Capasso does. My position is basically everything digital at Capasso when it comes to the digital licensing space. To put it in a brief context, for a service like iTunes or Spotify, services like that, for them to launch in South Africa legally, there's various copyrights that they need to license. And I'm the person who does the negotiations and licensing for those contracts. So for something like an iTunes download, because it's the download serves as the mechanical reproduction, and therefore a mechanical royalty is due. But additionally, what we call a master right, which is the right to the actual sound recording as opposed to the composition, that also needs to be covered, and that's covered directly from the record label side. In terms of streaming, the only additional aspect in a stream is a performance royalty, due to a stream being essentially a performance to the public. So 3 royalty streams would occur from a stream and 2 from a digital download. In terms of performance royalties, that's SAMRO's core business, and everyone should register with SAMRO, and that's under the presumption that they are the composer. It's important to make that distinction between a composer and a performing artist, where composer being the person who actually writes the music and lyrics, the performing artist being the one who performs it but won't necessarily be the writer in some senses. So yeah, so with regard to performance royalties, SAMRO is the person to become a member of. Mechanical royalties, Capasso, and to add to this, all of these memberships can be done online on the various websites. The forms can be downloaded. Master rights, usually that belongs to the record label. The master right belongs to the person who funded the recording, essentially, or facilitated the recording. So usually that will be paid out in the case that you have a record label. If not, and you belong to an aggregator or something like that, then the aggregators are the ones who pay that master right out to you. Aggregators is huge for the industry, and it's huge for the digital space in particular. An aggregator, by definition, is essentially a digital distributor of music. Not in all the cases. A lot of aggregators still do physical distribution. But from a sort of core business sense, aggregators allow independent artists who aren't signed to record labels, who have just potentially done home recordings, home studio recordings, And through an aggregator, they can get their music onto all of the major digital service providers like iTunes, Spotify. Not only can they get them released in South Africa, but also around the world. So that's great, essentially, you know, to get heard in places that, and downloaded and start generating revenue in places that you may not have had access to in the past. Aggregators start doing additional services on top of that. Some aggregators now are having mastering features where they're mastering specifically for iTunes or specifically for different types of services. They add website design features that help in that sense. They're sort of an all-encompassing avenue, essentially, into the digital space. So great for the music industry and for independent artists. It varies greatly. In terms of actual pricing, it's difficult to tell, based generally just on the different pricing models. But the main focus and consideration to take is some aggregators work on a fee per album or per single. The per album fee usually ranges from around 500 Rand if you had to convert it from dollars into rands, and the per single usually about 100 to 150 Rand. That's one pricing model where it's just the upfront fee, your music gets distributed, and you get 100% of the sales that are coming from that. Other aggregators prefer to do something a little different, where they'll lower that initial upfront fee, but then take a percentage of sales. CD Baby, for example, has a lower upfront fee, but takes a 9% of the sales coming in. Then on the complete flip side, you may get someone who takes no upfront fee, but takes a large percent of your sales to compensate for that. Personally, I prefer the straight upfront fee, no percentage of sales. It's kind of depends on what you're expecting. If you're obviously expecting a lot of downloads and a lot of activity, the upfront fee is what you want to go for, and your sales won't be touched. But if you're still a bit unsure, you're still a bit new, potentially you don't have the money to fork out that upfront fee, and you're happy to sacrifice that percentage of sales. So it's essentially personal preference. I'm going off personal experience. TuneCore being the biggest aggregator, I've personally seen how TuneCore work. I've seen the reports they reproduce, the statements they give, their payout times are all very, very good. They have sort of very comprehensive lists of where your music's been downloaded, in which territory, how many times, how many streams have taken place, and how much money has accumulated from that. Now, all of the aggregators essentially have the same form of business. Essentially, they would do it differently in terms of their reporting and statements. But once again, there's so many out there internationally that it's based on personal preference. I would recommend people to just research and go look at what the different aggregators are offering. As I said in the previous question, there was a lot of them have additional suites of services that may be more attractive to some people. But anyone, I mean, CD Baby, Afrocore, Mesh, there's so many out there. It's just a matter of exploring. Essentially, iTunes is still very new to South Africa. A lot of people are quite ignorant towards it and don't even know that it's here yet. In terms of other download sites, iTunes most definitely holds the monopoly here, and obviously around the world, being the biggest music distributor. With respect to the downloads, I think more focus needs to be placed on streaming sites, and a lot of people don't even know that sites like Audio and Deezer, streaming services, are available in South Africa. And there's a lot of development going on in the streaming area, because that's essentially where the sort of end user usage is heading. It's more, a lot of people find it a more attractive product. Across Africa, there's great things happening with respect to ringback tones, purely based on broadband and sort of data issues and things. Nigeria, for example, is predominantly ringback tones, and it's showing a great feed of revenue. But yeah, Beatport, for example, is doing some really great things in terms of the EDM, the electronic dance music side, and it's growing in stature, and who knows, potentially may get to the point of iTunes, considering how big the EDM market is. But quite definitely, iTunes has the hold on the music industry. So yeah, this is the sort of legal and technology race that's happening, and obviously for the law to keep up with technology, it's incredibly difficult. YouTube was, without going into Napster and all of that, YouTube has presented a sort of copyright playground with respect to infringement, things like that. Essentially, all YouTube licenses should be sync licenses. Sync licensing being where a music file is attached to a video image. So when YouTube first arrived, it caused a whole mess, and lawsuits were being thrown around left, right, and center. But since that, YouTube have done some great things in terms of trying to sort of monitor some form of copyright and compensate for copyright holders. They now have something which is called a content ID system, which basically is a form of filtering system where they store copyrights in terms of music videos, all forms of copyright in this content ID system. And every time a video is uploaded to YouTube, it's filtered through this to see if there's any matches. And if there is, it notifies the copyright holder and then gives them the option to either take that video down, to monitor it to see its usage stats, things like that, or to monetize it. And that's where those little 5-second adverts come into play, and that advertising revenue starts generating revenue for the copyright holders. With respect to individual people just uploading random videos here and there, not covers, but their own compositions in just a recorded song, YouTube allows anyone to essentially apply for monetization of their account, and then essentially start generating advertising revenue for themselves. There's a lot of additional services, which I wouldn't necessarily put them in the aggregator box, but aggregators do have some form of YouTube monetization where they act on your behalf, essentially, to find videos that are using your compositions or your songs, things like this, and monetize those accounts on your behalf. Audium.com, for example, that is their core business. They focus just on finding copyrights and monetizing videos, and then therefore generating the revenue for composers. When you say resolved, it's not quite yet there, because there's various other issues with rates and things and high court judgments which are now being fought. The whole needle time issue is a very touchy subject in the music industry. But one development, as you say, which has come about and is great for the industry, is the merge between Poser and Sampra. So just to give you a bit of background, needle time was historically in our law and has recently been brought back, and it's essentially the copyright which compensates performers and master rights owners. So anyone that has had some input or input on a recording, that right is essentially licensed the same way that Samro licensed their performing right for the composition. So Sampra, who have been doing the licensing for needle time, have been licensing various music users for the right to perform that sound recording as opposed to the composition which Samro does. And basically the issue has stemmed from where that money is going to go, how it's going to be distributed, because there's two parties that need to be compensated for. One being the performers, who are the additional band members, the session musicians, producers in some cases, who have added to that sound recording but haven't essentially wrote that song. And then on the other end, you get the master rights owners, who traditionally are the record labels, who have obviously funded the recordings and that being their input. Due to bad legislation and various sort of loopholes in the law, that money was essentially going to be collected by Sampra representing just record labels, paid out directly to the record labels, and from there it was going to be left up to the record labels to pay the performance branch, which seems fine from a layman perspective, but essentially the record labels could use that money to recoup expenses. The law doesn't essentially say what percentage split has to be done, so they could essentially give the performers nothing. They could take the whole 100%. I'm not saying that they would. I'm just saying the possibility was there. And what this merger has now done is it provides one licensing and collecting society with respect to needle time that licenses these music users, collects the 100%, and from there 50% gets distributed into a performers branch, which is Poser or Poser Trust, and a label branch, which is Sampra, and therefore people know that the money will be split equally. Session musicians, for example, a lot of them don't even know that this needle time exists, and people have generally thought that only the composer, the person who wrote the song, has a claim to any royalty. But this means that there's a portion of about 200 million which is yet to be distributed by Sampra, and an additional portion ranging from around 350 million, which still needs to be collected for. And this money now will kind of essentially start flowing, and this merger means that this money will start being distributed to these performers and labels alike. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's a big sort of debate and struggle essentially that's going on worldwide. Labels, since the birth of the internet and piracy and all of that, have been sort of clinging to different business models and different ideas to start keeping their business afloat and generating the revenue that they used to. But yeah, I do still think they've got a long time. They're going to be around for a long time, and the reason I say that is labels and publishers, they have the infrastructure, with majors in particular, they have the infrastructure, they have the finances, they're not afraid to spend money. Clout, essentially, they, you know, being represented by a label, your sort of perspective from how everyone else sees you is a lot more professional, a lot more, it goes a long way, essentially. And marketing, the record labels and publishers, they know how to market. That's their business, essentially, and they've been doing it for so long. Yeah, with respect to the digital space and what it allows, it essentially just gives independent artists the ability to get a lot further without those record labels and publishers. And there's a lot more that they can do. And essentially they can get themselves to a point where they're at a sort of stature where the contract negotiations and things like that with record labels and publishers become a lot more easier, and terms can be negotiated for a lot more in your favor. Whether you can go it alone completely without a record label ever getting, yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's not like it's not possible. We just have yet to see it done completely without the influence of a record label or publisher. But yeah, I do still think that they have a long time. Yeah, definitely, you know, provided that you have the knowledge, essentially. If you don't know what you're doing, obviously the label is and publishers are the best route to go. But you need to make sure that your label and publisher are doing what you need of them, essentially. A lot of publishers and a lot of record labels will sort of just sign you on, you know, in a sort of standard deal, taking a cut of your copyright, and you know, you not having a good knowledge of the industry, may be signing a terrible deal only for your publisher to just sit with your copyright and not do anything with it. Publishers' jobs are to exploit your music and to get your music out there, and to contact DSTV, for example, to get your music onto the next DSTV advert, or nurture you as a songwriter and help you with development. And respectively, record labels, it's their job to market, and it's their job to look after you and in the same light nurture and develop you as a performing artist. So I'd steer clear of the sort of just seeing a record contract in front of you and seeing a big sum of money and just, where do I sign, essentially, you know. And as I said in the previous question, there's so many with respect to aggregators and online, there's so much you can do for yourself to get yourself to a point where record labels will essentially be coming to you. And that's where you have the negotiating power. And maybe essentially you don't even need those record labels and publishers at all, and you could shoot your career into stardom without them. But yeah, I would steer clear of record labels and publishers with hoping that you've at least given yourself an opportunity and a chance with all the tools that you have in a digital space. Yeah, most definitely. The thing with this industry is things are happening all the time, as we know, and things change every day. We saw this U2 iTunes partnership where they managed to distribute to over 500 million users, one of the biggest distributions in history, essentially. People are now releasing their music on apps. Alt J, for example, released an app which was location-based. It was their new album, and essentially you had to go to a park or a monument or somewhere interesting, and only in those locations could you stream their new album. Radiohead released an app which was a sort of soundscape app developed to sort of mirror the feel of their new album. Large things are happening, and it's great to see. People are partnering up. Jay-Z and the big Samsung partnership was huge. With respect to South Africa, we're getting there, and there's a lot of things that need to change. A copyright review commission has been given, which needs to take a look at our outdated Copyright Act and address certain areas. Broadband, with respect to broadband, it's been a big reason why streaming services have sort of been wary to come here, but things are looking good in that respect as well. Data costs are coming down, telecoms upping their line speeds, things like that. But yeah, things are looking good for the international industry, and it's interesting to see where sort of people are exploiting new spaces with respect to the digital world to get their music out there in different, more interesting ways. Yeah, know your business essentially. If you're a composer or you're an artist or you're wanting to start a label, you need to know what you're doing, and you need to know what copyrights exist, and you need to get knowledgeable. You know, take courses, look online, read books, do what you need to do, because essentially that's going to be the make or break. Obviously, you can get managers and things like that, but even in respect of those, who is going to negotiate your management contract? Who's going to, you know, negotiate the contracts when you get into record deals or publishing agreements? So yeah, just know your business essentially, and know what you're doing, and stay up to date, and follow industry trends. And from that, as I say, using the digital world and the tools that you have, you can boost your career tremendously. Yeah, so people can contact me at Warrick at Capasso. Warrick, I'm sure you'll get the spelling out, W-A-R-R-I-C-K-P at Capasso. And yeah, feel free to ask me anything if you need help with contracts or you're looking for advice. I'm always happy to help and give some advice on things. Protect your copyright.
Thanks so much to Warrick for joining us in studio, and Shot for tuning in, folks. We hope you guys got a clearer insight into the world of digital and online music. Until next time, keep it live and local.